So, no, I wouldn't say I have a passion for HR.
Welcome back to Human Resources for the People. It's a human capital revolution. Today we're going to be talking about how to fire someone in Peru. If you were ever wondering, we're going to be answering that question. It's I've said it before, but I really enjoy comparative HR. There's a lot of value to it. There's a lot of you're able to learn how we can do things better in the country. I'm going to mostly be comparing law in the United States and Peru, although there will be times that I'll sort of cite other countries. But let's get into it. This article is from Rodrigo Elias and Medrano Abogados. Abogado, I believe, is lawyer in Spanish. So it's a law firm that does employment law specifically in the country. And in Peru, besides layoffs or what's called redundancies, employees can be dismissed only for just cause. So the law has said that it's only related to capability or conduct, right? So whether or not an employee can do it based on their physical, intellectual, mental, or sensory deficiencies, as well as conduct with respect to violent acts or failing to comply with work obligations. And if an employee is fired without just cause, they can only have two rewards: reinstatement or compensation for arbitrary dismissal. So it depends. You either get, for example, if you're unfairly or arbitrarily dismissed, you can receive 1.5 months of your salary times every year of service, and 1.5 month salary for every month remaining on the contract if you have a fixed term. So that's a really interesting. So unlike the United States, employment contracts are frequent. So if you're on an indefinite employment contract, that means that you'll be paid 1.5 months times your salary for every year of service. Very, very, very interesting. I'm curious. Most countries do not have the disability protections that the United States have. That's actually one thing that many will tell you, is that the disability protections in the United States are unique and unlike many others. And so I'm curious about whether or not what level of physical incapacity plays a role in Peru, and where the line is drawn, right? So physical incapacity is just cause in Peru, but to what level do you have to accommodate? In the United States, it's a pretty high level, but I wonder where that is in Peru. Um, in addition, if they're dismissed for cause, they don't get severance pay, but you do have to go to through the process. And part of the process is the employee gets 6 calendar days to defend themselves after they're fired. And one thing that I'm also interested in is you actually can't, as a manager, you don't get reinstatement. They can't request reinstatement if they're unfairly dismissed. And so that is a really interesting concept. And in addition, the Supreme Court has ruled that they don't get, or they may not be entitled to compensation for arbitrary dismissal. So really, Peru employment law appears to be mostly focused on the frontline employee, the frontline worker, and less so focused on the managers and upper management. Uh, you can terminate by mutual consent. However, there is no formal requirements to pay anyone. You don't have to give them uh, money, and in fact, separation agreements, which are common in the United States, to that release waiver of claims against the employer, are not allowed in Peru. I think that this is, and the sentence goes, it's not possible to waive statutory rights. I think this is really important note. So there is, for example, arbitration agreements in the United States where if you are fired unjustly, you may sign something prior to your employment that says that you'll go through arbitration. And often these arbitrations are very unfair. Uh, Under US law, arbitration agreements are legal, especially when they're signed at the beginning of employment. And so as a result, uh, it's really Peru in this scenario is much better than the United States because arbitration agreements are completely legal and you can sign away your statutory rights uh, with no recourse really. That is possible. Redundancies or layoffs, as it's called in the United States, and I think that's I believe it's unique in the English speaking world. I think most English speakers call it redundancies, or most outside of the United States. But anyway, you can do layoff in cases where there's significant economic, technological, or structural issues happening. As long as it's more than 10% of the workforce, and and also whether or not the business is closing. So if the business is closing, then of course you can lay off. There's no compensation, and employees have no right to claim any compensation when there's a layoff. Uh, in addition, like I said, the procedure entails discharging 10% or more and bargaining with the employees, and often, and you have to get approval from the Ministry of Labor, which is interesting. I don't know, layoffs happen so frequently in the United States that they're not approved in Peru. They're rarely approved by the Ministry of Labor, which I think is really interesting. I um, I just think that layoffs need to happen quite often. For example, a building goes down or a production area goes down, and it's not possible to assume them elsewhere. And making it, rarely approved, I think that is very difficult. Of course, it's easy if the building's shutting down or if the business is shutting down. And I think that you have to realize that this is really what might happen, right? If the Ministry of Labor isn't approving layoffs and the business is still running in the red, ultimately it will just destroy the business. That's all that will happen. There's not recourse, It doesn't work like that. So I think that this probably leads to more business failures, but I would have to do more analysis. Um, Ultimately, they do get any remuneration due and statutory benefits due within 48 hours of termination. This is kind of interesting. I mean, this is specific to layoffs and not specific to anything else, but the 48 hours of termination, there are states in the United States that have specific rules around terminations and when someone should be paid. In Nevada, I believe it's 3 days from termination. I believe you have to pay them immediately in California, although I've never worked in California. And there's other similar rules. So I think that's interesting. Peru's is specifically surrounding layoffs, but it is something that happens elsewhere. In addition, if they're laid off, they do get a preferential right to come back within 1 year of the agreement being terminated. And so I think it's not statutory in the United States. There's nothing that calls for that. I think that's what the business prefers in the United States and elsewhere, that they prefer to bring back the people that they know. But obviously there are times when it's a cost-cutting move and they can't afford it. And so they'll bring back cheaper labor. But that's it. I wanted to go over this. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye, guys.